All right, welcome to Thinking on Thursdays. After we go through an entire week, we've been thinking about things, or things have surfaced. So this weekly episode, Thinking on Thursdays, is our way to say, hey, this is what we're thinking about. Of all of the things that we do here and all of the things that we talk about, today this is what we're thinking about. So today we're thinking about fractures, and we're thinking about fractures that sit in the foundation. And when you're into the sub-perceptual tendency resolution and transformation model, then you know that the foundation is beneath this perceptual threshold that we all have. And it's from this foundation that we build this life upon. And that should sound familiar to most everybody who's listening to this. Like, of course, there is something that you've built upon. But for us, when we think about what is it that's been constructed as the foundation, and what are these core fractures that exist, and how have they been playing out over time? How do they get constructed? And then how do we use this fracture as an awareness to say something's going on, I need to do something about it, or I can sense when it's showing up? So many things that we can talk about. So Josh, let me just toss over here, fractures.
Yeah, these fractures that you're mentioning here, I wouldn't say it's a new phenomenon, I guess, in terms of just something that we are just now experiencing. It's something that we've all experienced. I think the languaging around it is new for me, to kind of really understand kind of the systematic approach to how my life runs on a daily basis, based off of these fractures that I have in my foundation. I was just thinking about, my parents, live in Louisiana, and this particular area they live, the mud, old gumbo mud or whatever, the soil has not served them well in building good foundations. They've had a lot of foundational issues, throughout their 30 plus years of living at this house, and brought in experts, think they could solve it, and they tend to last for a little bit, and all of a sudden those fractures keep coming back in their foundation. It creates other issues in the house and, by their swimming pool and so on, and it's just very interesting to see how fragile the structures are when these fractures show up in the foundation, the inability to kind of support oneself.
So now we've added a layer here. There is a foundation that life has been built upon, and things happen to us in our human growth and development since we were born until our teenage years. Things have happened to us that have caused a fracture, but you're bringing light directly to the fact that the environment around us, when the foundation is getting constructed, the environment has a large part to play in what's happening to our foundation, which is why for us, when we think about finding fractures in somebody's foundational way of being, we're highly aware of what was the system around them, this soil that you're talking about.
Well, just that thought right there is, the foundation is a victim to the environment. The foundation that you have in your own life can be victim to your circumstances, to the life that you were brought up in, and it very much is a true thought to think that we're a victim to this system, because your very foundation, the things that are so important at an early age that need to be developed are going to be predicated on what is it being built around, what's surrounded, what is the environment. We hear stories all the time, the different, traumas that people experience in early childhood, the circumstances, things that are not out of their control or in their control. And because of that, out of that, we do things to protect stuff. We create this system to protect these foundational things that we experience, these pains, these exiles, these wounds, whatever language we want to throw at this thing. And all of a sudden, a system has been formed on top of something that was deeply fractured.
So now we have some layers here. There is a need to understand the story of what was around someone as they were growing up. There's value in that because that defines the structure with which the foundation was constructed upon. So when we're talking about these things, then I could just say, when I was young, a foundation fracture was I had no interest in a lot of the school subjects in elementary and middle school. It was uninteresting to me at best. So as a result, like, my grades are horrible. And I also really didn't care. I was more interested in building a skateboard ramp in my backyard, or my dad loves this story, taking a telephone wire that they took off the poles when they replaced them, and my friends and I made a zip line out of that. Minus the fact that a telephone wire doesn't hold any weight. Like, I was more interested in creative problem solving than anything to do with like learning French or something like that. But I can distinctly recall these moments at that age and not understanding why my mom would say what she said or have the thoughts that she then revealed externally to me that were so wounding and harmful. In fifth grade, I had no concept of this. All I knew is, oh, I'm an idiot. Right. That's all I knew. And so here's a fracture, but empathy comes from understanding the soil around the foundation. Now, later in life, as I do my timeline and look back and say, oh, no, that wasn't at all what I thought it was. I'm not excusing the wound. I'm just understanding it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to just kind of, understand, why these fractures, what they can do to us, how they can materialize, later in life, and just the need to protect that. I mean, the idea that you somehow, embedded that you're an idiot, based on your experiences has led you to a PhD, right? Quite a compensation for, not being smart enough at a young age. Now, the world, and I'm sure yourself, even like we applaud, accolades, because that's like, man, that's a really good thing. And that's not to take away from that. But the problem is, and this, is like, where's that source? Where's that need to prove myself? Where's that need to go get this PhD coming from? Is it coming from my authentic self or from this wounded place? My story is similar, right? At a young age, like 10 years of age, I didn't get selected for an all-star game. I didn't have a traumatic event that happened in my life, but I do remember that, and being in a tree, watching the game and not being selected and thinking never again, never again. So I go on and do all these cool, fun things through athletics, but was it coming from my authentic self, or was it coming from a place like, I got to prove my worth?
So we're using a phrase now, authentic self. And for those who are watching this and are not familiar with the world of therapeutic interventions, we're talking about internal family systems therapy right now. It's a phenomenal model, and it helps us differentiate, or really when you say, am I acting from me, or am I doing something that's going to sabotage this whole thing in a matter of, minutes, hours, days? So there's a way to listen into the way you're talking to yourself and the way you're doing what you're doing. And this internal family systems therapy model to say, is it authentic, or is it a way that I've learned to protect myself from getting hurt again, just like I did in the whatever, take your pick, memory we're talking about. So if we have this moment where you're sitting in a tree and you say, never again, or I'm in the elementary school and I realized at some point I needed glasses. That's why I was put into the lowest reading level in elementary school. I just couldn't read anything. But I didn't know this. But we both have these like defining points where we would say, okay, I will accomplish with no end. For me, that was later in life. For you, just in a tree and saying, I'm going to have this never happen again to me. But how did it play out for you? What did that mean when you've committed to that decision, never again?
Well, exactly that. I mean, I never not got selected for an all-star game. Would go on, throughout my high school career and be very successful. I tell you what it really did was I never felt like anything was secure in my terms of my athletic ability. Like I was always worried about, would I start? Am I good enough? And so I'm just constantly pushing, constantly, performing. I become a professional baseball player. I would later on become a collegiate football player and just win all these awards because I was scared.
Let's now, so we're talking fractures in the foundation. So there's this moment that says, I will never allow this to happen again. So I will go to the ends of the earth to get onto all-star selection and do all the things. Okay, but now let's just move forward from that moment when you've decided this is true. So now we've got a fracture that's just presented itself. So now fast forward, if it's weeks or months, the way that your salient neural network has shifted and what you're paying attention to, coaches' faces, players, like everything now is this information that you have to acquire and analyze to then justify this future state that you've now decided to commit to. I'm just wondering, how did that play out for you?
Yeah, how that played out, I mean, hypervigilant just every practice, every game. I mean, little things like just take the conditioning part of my football practice. I would never want to lose a race. I would not want to be last. I would just always constantly like, man, I've got to make sure I keep my job. Games, just being super critical of self, like, did I do enough? I have a funny story. When I was a sophomore, we kind of got beat really, really bad by this team. And I was playing and starting some then, but I wasn't doing a whole lot, but I was out there on the field. And I remember there was one play I missed a block. And my running back paid a pretty bad price. I felt so bad about it after the game. I went up to the coach, and said, look, I am so sorry that I missed. I will never again do that. Even though we lost 45-0, my play was very insignificant to that. But in my mind, I was afraid he would see that play and like, I'm not going to play the next day. Now, he honored that. Actually, he called it out and was like, hey, this is the type of player we need on the team. And I appreciate that. But the truth be known, I was coming from a place of fear, like, oh my gosh, if he sees that play, I may not get to play again. And the crazy thing is, success hid a lot of that. A lot of people didn't know the fear that I played with, the fear of just not being good enough, and just constantly looking like I always felt threatened by other players. Is he going to try to take my job? Is he going to try to, whatever, and never just being comfortable with me and my abilities.
We know that protecting parts use extreme behavior, but we also know that there is a thing called post-traumatic growth. So you can still go through a hard thing and take a stance, like, coach, even though we were getting destroyed 45 to about nothing, I own it. I missed that block, and that had an impact on our team. So I think there's a little pivot point here where, if we are going back to your earlier sentence, if we're stuck in this idea of not victim mentality, but there's a consequence of the environment around me growing up causing a fracture in my being. I'm not discounting that, but then there's also this other side of the coin to say, yeah, but you responded to something in a significant manner. But we would then ask, is the way that I am now responding to life coming from the old fracture, or is it coming from this growth moment that I had? That's now right back to, is this authentic self, or is this me trying to protect myself, and I'm acting out of this fractured sight that tells me I must be perfect no matter what?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of set it up, because I think about my 46-year-old self, and still I feel like I'm under that cloud of like, am I enough, or never again, and constantly just the need to chase, the need to prove, the need to just, not fail, and it's funny when I even say that word, because there's so many ways to define failure, because, from my lens, I see it one way, but which causes me to overlook all the successes along the way, because they're never enough. It's just crazy. People can look at my resume and go, God dang, man, you've done a lot. You've helped a lot of people. You've done a lot of cool things, on and on and on. Now I'm sitting there going, yeah, but it's not enough, And so it really has just shaped the way I see life, and probably kind of caused me to miss a lot of things that are really good in my life,
Tell us about this event recently that happened to you. You got to enjoy some rest and relaxation out in the woods. You were out on a hike, but you got to rest, and you were laying down by these two aspens. And just walk us through the way that you connected metaphorically to this forest and these aspens and that selective field of focus.
Well, it was just interesting. You know, I was doing a little bit of integration work with a couple of the guys, and I was doing my own work, and so at this point, we decided to kind of separate and just kind of have some time to ourselves. And I was walking through the woods, and honestly, here we are in the beautiful mountains of Colorado, and I was choosing like the worst, lowest point to go to. I couldn't see nothing. I don't really know why I chose this spot, but I was going to find a spot, and I was getting frustrated. Like, I can't find a daggum stump to sit on, you know, or somewhere just to look comfortable. Honestly, I felt like God was like, you can lay down, you know. And it was just like, here's another moment of like, stop trying to figure this out. Just chill, just relax. So I did. I just laid down. And as I was laying there, I was kind of like, you know, processing some of this stuff we were just talking about now. And I sat up, and there happened to be two aspen trees, like about 2.5 feet apart, right in front of me. And as soon as I looked up, it felt like I was looking through a scope. And I just could see just this one path right before me. And it was like God kind of showing like, hey, this is how you've always seen life, through this lens. And you've always felt like you're in control, that you got to solve, that you got to fix it, that you got to conquer it, whatever. And then all of a sudden I kind of leaned back and I could see the whole forest. And it was almost like God saying, this is how I see life. And I leaned forward and I was like, this is how you. I leaned back, this is how I see it. And I was sitting with that, and I was having a conversation with another guy. And, you know, the way that I have lived my life is I've never failed. Take it back. Failed one time, my professional career in baseball. Another moment of never again. So I have never failed. Now, when I say that, that doesn't mean I haven't experienced hardships or anything. Like, when I say I never failed, I've always managed to survive, to just figure out the next thing. And why that's important is because I was having that conversation, goes, what would it look like if you failed? And I got to sit with that thought for a second, because I'm like, what would I learn from failure? Because I've never allowed myself to fail. So I don't even know what I would learn, because I never experienced that. And I wonder how many lessons in life I missed because of this need to chase, never again, always prove myself. So when you think about these fractures that happened way back when, here I am at 46 still, an example of an 8-year-old fracture. You know, now it has been molded and sharpened and fine-tuned in ways that, you know, I don't see it as an 8-year-old self. I feel the urgency. I feel like the pain. I got to get this done. But if trooping home, I trace the thing back. It's an 8-year-old that's going, man, never again. And so that really hit me today. Just kind of like, man, what am I missing out by not failing? You know, and that was huge for me today.
It's such a powerful and simple example of these massive topics. Reminds me of the book talking about the second mountain. And for both of us in our kind of station in life and what we've both lived through and what's happened to us. And I know for me personally, getting to the top of that first mountain that had defined everything up into my mid-40s, thinking that that's my destination, right, which then means I had a collection of fractures, and there's usually for me one or two that are primary. Everything else is just chips off the block. Right. So here's these couple of fractures. I'm an idiot. I won't be able to accomplish much. So I set off to do the exact opposite of that and do really good things. Yeah. Fantastic. And here in Colorado, we say this a lot. Like, we love our 14ers out here. There's nothing on top of that mountain except for a view of what you don't have in front of you. And here I am going, this first mountain that I've accomplished, and I'm on top of this mountain going, well, there's nothing here. This whole thing has been an entire lie for the most part. I have good things, of course, family, kids, friends, yes. But I'm saying the defined future as it was built on fractures put me on that first mountain, and I'm coming out into this valley between first mountain and second mountain. But the beautiful thing now is coming down into this valley, like there's lushness down here, and there's resources, and there's opportunity down here. So when I redefine what that second mountain is, I don't have to bring these old fractures with me. So now I'm free. And we say this a lot. Fractures take our power of choice. They take it from us. Second mountain, as I look down that trail in this lush valley going, that first mountain, yeah, that's a load of BS. Where we're going, I get choice back. Now it's for me to decide. I'm not being driven by these old things.
I think it's interesting you say that too, but you can't see the second mountain without the first, right? It's like, so when we talk about circumstances or the environment, the soil, whatever it is, it's like, it's very conducive that, hey, we've got to get to the top of this mountain, and so to say like that's not a smart move, it's not a right phrase, because everything around you says that's what you got to do to be a man, to be a woman, to be successful. I mean, all the identities that are on top of that barren mountain. And once you get there, you realize, man, it's just not very fruitful up here, and everything below is the fruit. But, when you're down here in the thick of it, it's hard to not dream about that mountain, and so these fractures, I don't want them to hold me back, So they create this crazy skill set of successes in my life to get to something that was never fulfilling. I was actually had that thought today. It's like, everything I've chased is never fulfilled. Everything I've chased has never fulfilled, because there's always another thing to chase. I've never been able to settle. Well, I wonder why. Because back here is like never again, and constantly just repeating patterns, repeating stories, repeating, the same old mistake. Here we go again. It's like, at some point it's like, maybe I am an idiot. Maybe I'm not willing to learn, from self, because that's what we do, man. We think, well, this time will be different. I hear that a lot in recovery. Well, this time will be different, but until you address these fractures, you're going to repeat the same patterns. You may have a little bit different exhaust, but in all, it's going to be similar results.
As we know from all of our timeline work, when we help clients go from origin, birth to that extent to the present day, and we look at just the developmental process that has occurred from a structural sense, from a developmental sense, personal sense. But then it's really easy to see the triggers. It's really obvious. And it then makes a whole lot more sense why those tendencies are sitting here. So in this valley between first and second mountain, when the old trigger shows up, and if I were to say never again, or it's going to be different this time, if I say that, it was because I went back and understood why the fracture was. And then getting a second lens to say, oh, that's interesting. My mom ran away from home multiple times because she couldn't stand it. So it would make sense that she had her thing. I never knew that. Right. Not until like in my 30s when I heard all the old stories. Those carousels, the old slideshow projector? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were doing some old family stuff, family photos from my mom's side and my dad's side, and I got the old carousels out. And that's when we heard the stories I had never heard before. But now it makes a lot more sense. So now in the present moment, it'll be different this time? Well, because it's not even in the same world anymore. Those old triggers are now comical. The tendencies are mine to design, because I'm not building off of this old foundation that has these old fractures.
Mm. Another thing interesting with these fractures, how do you know if you have a fracture? All you had to do is apply pressure. And I think about that a lot because, I've always bragged about playing through injuries or working out through, it's like a badge of honor or something. And it's such an egotistical mindset. But I think that's how a lot of us live life, And so when we hold these wounds, we tend to adapt. We tend to, adjust, but never really getting back to original design. And so how do you know if you have a fracture? Just apply pressure. And that pressure can be a lot of different things. For me, financial pressure or, status pressure, or, for me, a lot of it too is just like, hey, I know I can help somebody. I think about it from a spiritual sense, Satan knows these fractures. And so if he can just apply pressure and get you to react out of your fracture, like he's won, And so like, I think about this a lot, is like how my faith hasn't helped me. That's kind of a, whoa. Well, because I'm chasing, I'm trying to react to this wound, protect myself. So I use faith to protect myself, not to really honor God. Not from the standpoint that he would want me to, from a wholeness, from original design. You think about it in a marriage, an argument with a wife, and the reactivity piece that happens between y'all, I mean, that's the fracture that you're holding on to. That's not a wife or a husband problem. I mean, but we tend to get so focused on the external that we never look inward at what's being revealed. Because when you feel the tension, when you feel the pressure, when you feel the pain, that's a cue to go, what am I holding on to? What is that? What is that getting triggered right now?
When we were talking with Teresa, the physical therapist that works with us here, and we were talking about guarding. And when she's working on the physiological and the physical side of this whole person, outside of emotions and psychology and the existential crises that we find ourselves in, but she's just working on the body. And you talk about guarding and protecting a wound. Like the body instantly says, oh, okay, got it. This is how we don't feel that again, despite its consequence to the system. I can hardly move my arm. I can't straighten out my back. Getting out of a chair is hard. Like all of the things that we do compensatorily revealed in the body, and here it is us doing it to ourselves internally, guarding and protecting. And all that does is take away our freedom, take away our choice. Right. So if those two things mean anything to somebody, freedom and the power of choice, like find the fractures because they have taken it from you.
Right, and you can never find fulfillment if you keep holding those fractures. You may get moments, you may get, seasons of what you think is peace, what you think is fulfillment, but all you got to do is have enough pressure, and then you'll know. And I mean, like just to think you can just kind of bury the fractures, throw a little bit more dirt on it. Don't talk about it. That's the solve. Man, that is one of the most dangerous recipes for something pretty catastrophic happening in life. Because we see it, we do these timelines a lot with people, and we can see the rupture, from, these fractures that we hold and the chaos that comes from that. I just, it's unfortunate how many of us are walking around, just we're one amount of pressure away from just really kind of rupturing. We just need a little push. And so the opportunity to find healing, through this process is, man, I would encourage anybody to do it, because life would look so much better. Life would feel so much better, because you don't realize, because that's the only thing you realize when you're injured, like it really taxes your body physically. When you mentally are injured, it's taxing because you're constantly on guard. I hope this thing doesn't get triggered.
So this is what we're thinking about on a Thursday. So when next week, who knows what we'll be thinking about, but we like to just take this pause in the week. This is a thing that we've been thinking about, and we think it has some connection to the process that people go through and that we go through, because we're working right alongside everybody else on ourselves. But we're thinking about fractures. We're thinking about how they got built and developed in the first place, and then what do they produce for triggers and tendencies? And understanding the story of the developmental cycle, going back into that place and saying, oh, that's what that's about. Here's my little shift, my little pivot, my little healing in that area, resolving that moment, and now here's what I got for life going forward.